This is the first game I ever made. I made it something like 5 years ago, and it was so glitchy that I had to make some modifications when recording this footage so that you could move around. All in all, it was a pretty bad game. But behind these pixels is that same game, but I upgraded it using all of my game development skills that I've learned over the years. This was very fun to do, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Also subscribe, please. The first immediate issues with the game that had to be fixed right away were your being unable to look straight up or down, and the fact that your cursor wasn't locked to the middle of the screen. These two issues made the game almost unplayable, so they were the first things to be fixed. Fixing the first problem was very easy. I just needed to change the values in some text fields, and now you were able to look straight up and straight down. The second problem was a bit harder, but still easy. Opening up my code editor, I added a few lines of code to make the mouse stay in a static position and also be hidden all the time. And with these simple fixes done, the game was now in a state that I could sort of work with. Now I decided to deal with my horrific polish. The first problem was the problem that was definitely annoying me the most. When you looked straight down, you could see part of yourself, and that wasn't something that I wanted. Fortunately, fixing this was easy. I just put the camera down lower and called it a day. And apart from being able to see your shadow, which was an even easier fix, I started repairing all of the horrible textures that you can find on the walls and the floor. Back when I was first making this game, I made the floor texture in MS Paint, and I just painted the name of the game, Zapfred, over a square and used that. The walls were some sort of stock glass image that I would have never guessed was glass, except for the name of the image file being glass. Apart from these textures looking really bad, when making my games these days, I prefer a much more simple and minimalistic look anyway, so after realizing all of the lights were tinted blue for some reason, I started to recolor everything to a monochromatic palette. And after this was done, the game was starting to look a whole lot cleaner, although with a bunch of random barriers put up in seemingly random places, it still looked pretty ugly. So, I temporarily removed them and decided to add them back later in a more organized and better looking way. Next, after fixing some symmetry problems, I started to fix the enemy AI because currently, it wasn't too great. The code for the enemies was messed up enough that I had to start from scratch with the code, so preventing the old code from running, I started to make the new script. Now, on this channel, I don't expect you to know what any code that I've written does, so I'm not going to go over what it does, but let's just say that the first iteration was kind of buggy. Fortunately, out of all the problems I could have had, this one was the easiest one to fix, with me just having to check a few boxes to prevent the enemy from going full spin mode. After realizing the walls had some height differences and immediately getting distracted from what I was working on to fix them, I got back to work on making the AI, and soon I started to work on letting him shoot things at you. I wrote the rest of the code that I needed to write for the enemy, it mostly being code that let it shoot projectiles at you. And while I do that, I want to make you feel bad if you're not subscribed because I'm about to hit 10 subscribers, but I can only do it with your help. So, if you can, please subscribe. It would mean a lot to me, and you can always unsubscribe later. With that shameless plug out of the way, let's take a look at the enemy behavior. This was the first version of the enemy behavior that could shoot projectiles. It gets closer to you if you're too far away, and if you're close enough, it shoots projectiles at you that at the moment were too slow, but I sped them up a fair bit later. Now, since currently the enemies were just big fat cylinders that made a blue ball out of thin air that went in your direction, I need to add some animation to them so that everything made a little bit more sense so that it was more pleasing to my brain. After doing some rewrite of the code that let it use animation, I started to make the animation for the enemy shooting the projectile. While I was making the animation, I also had to write a small script that made doing it a bit more easy, but my process for making it aside, here's what it looks like when he shoots stuff at you. Now, I wanted to add a bit of life to the enemy. Although I wanted the game to be simple, I wanted the enemies to be not just a cylinder. I had an idea to make them kind of be like self-driving cars, with a little rotating thing on top of their heads, but with some cute eyes instead of sensors. So that's exactly what I did, as you can see in the background footage. And with a bit of a rough start, I needed to fix some things that were kind of screaming out to me as something that I should fix. And fix them I did, and now instead of screaming out broken, they were screaming out cute. Next, I added an effect to the game that smoothed out the lines a bit and made them look a lot less jittery. And after that, it was time to start enacting my plan for what I wanted the game to be. I needed to make the enemies, who I decided to call Freds as a throwback to when I first made the game in 2016, spawn all over the map. While I write some code to make them spawn, I want to talk about what my game was going to be. Essentially, I wanted you to have to fight a bunch of continuously spawning enemy Freds that get harder to beat over time. There would be a score keeping track of how many Freds you've blown up with your own projectile shooter, and you would have 10 health so that you could hit 10 times before you died. It's a very simple idea, but it turned out to be very, very fun. Now, plugging in all the numbers and stuff that I needed for the enemy spawner to work, I finished making the enemy spawner, and it worked just like I wanted it to. Yay! Oh, apart from the fact that I forgot to add a cap to the number of Freds that could spawn at once. Yeah, that was changed pretty quickly. Next on the list was letting you blow up the enemies, because currently, there is no way to do that. And since one of the most important things I wanted you to be able to do in the game was to blow up the enemies, adding it to the game was pretty high priority. First, I made the effect for when the enemy blows up, and I have to admit, it was pretty good. And now, after doing that, I needed to write the code that let you shoot projectiles and blow those Freds up. Next, it was time for me to make one of the most satisfying effects in the game, blowing up Freds. Oh yeah, I messed some stuff up, but eventually I fixed it, and now it was extremely satisfying to blow a Fred up. Next, I made some modifications to the arena that included some pillars that you could hide behind. Of course, the enemies could still track you through the walls, but the main reason I added them was to make the arena a bit more interesting and to break up some of the uniformity that a completely flat arena brings. The thing I did after this makes the game about 100 times more satisfying. It was very simple, but to be honest, it's very, very fun at the same time. And after applying the same effect to your projectiles as well, the game became quite a bit more fun to play. And now I needed to ruin that fun by letting the enemy projectiles actually damage you, because currently, all that happened when they hit you was that a little text message popped up in the bottom left saying what your health was. First adding a health bar and an indicator telling you that it was a health bar, the process started very smoothly, and unlike most of the things that I make, it kept going smoothly all the way until I finished it. Next, writing the code to let the health bar work, I was ready to test it out, and I'm going to ignore the fact that it didn't work at all. But with just a few modifications, it worked, and now I needed to program it so that you died when your health reached 0. And taking far too long to make the death screen because I am a complete perfectionist, and then writing some code to make everything work as it should, I tested my health system out. Somehow, it managed to work flawlessly. In fact, I had encountered barely any bugs when making this game, and it made me pretty happy. Well, apart from the death screen not working. Here it is actually working. Now, while I add a score and a lot of other things into this game, I want to talk about the sponsors for this video. Me! The main reason I made this YouTube channel was to direct traffic to all the video games that I've made. So, if you want to support me, consider buying the video game I released called Direct Ascent. I spent a lot of time on it, and it's really fun. Anyway, back to the video. Now, it was time to make the title screen, and I wanted to stay with the vibe I had made when I was making the gameplay part of the game, so as you can see here, the title screen is very simple. However, it gets the job done, and I think it looks pretty decent. And that was it for the core mechanics of the game. Now, it was supposed to be time for me to fix bugs, but all of the bugs I knew of I couldn't find a fix for, so obviously, I couldn't fix them. But even though I had finished the core mechanics, there was still one glaring thing that I needed to add. However, it happened to be one of my favorite things to do when making games. It was adding sounds. I think sounds are really important in a game and make the game feel a lot better to play. But ignore my rant on the importance of sounds. Here are the sounds. This sound is a sound that plays when you get damaged. This sound plays when you blow up an enemy, and for this final sound, you hear it when you shoot a projectile. And with that done, I had finally succeeded in upgrading my first ever game. You can download it through a link in the description, and I think you will enjoy it. I made quite a fun game, and it certainly is better than the game was before. I think this shows how good you can get with just about anything by practicing it repeatedly. It may not always seem like that at first, but if you want to learn to do anything ever, know that at first you will be very, very bad, but over time, you'll grow and learn a lot like I did with my game development journey. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!